Part 8. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Long. Chapter 73. Sudbai's eyes gradually condensed. After Sophia gave him a hint, he did not choose to leave in a panic after the woman died. Instead, he strengthened his steps and swam directly towards the dark cave with a little hesitation. Past. It could be said that Sudbai was stunned, or it could be said that the extreme side of Sudbai's mind was released to a great extent because he was in the zombie state. However, at least, this is indeed what Sudbai really wants to do in his heart right now. A lot of entanglements, a lot of intrigues, a lot of secrets, including the previous scene, everywhere is filled with one kind of mystery after another, one after another. Sudbai did not choose to peel off the cocoons and slowly analyze and find out everything, because the workload of this project was so large that Sudbai himself was a little desperate. In this story world, the only one Sudbai could rely on was himself. He is just one person, so to a certain extent, he can do whatever he wants without any scruples. The biggest price is nothing more than death. However, if you follow the steps and be cautious, no matter how cautious you are, there is no guarantee that you will survive. No matter what, do it, the chance of death is still too high. After all, this is a group mission of 20 people, and it has always been known for the high death toll. Before, Sudbai had said to Fatty and Yigu, "I don't believe that if we encounter danger and encounter warning signs, we will just rush forward. In the end, it will really be all of us who die." This is what Sudbai said and what he did. When the current strength cannot break through all the fog, then just rush into the fog. The purple bell came towards Sudbai before, but Sudbai just silently stretched out his hand to hold it in his hand. Sudbai failed to understand Sophia's reminder before she died. It should have conveyed a lot of information. However, the most direct and simple way at this time is to go and see it in person. Even if it is dangerous, in the story world, if you are not afraid of danger, you will not be able to obtain truly useful information, let alone complete the task. However, when Sudbai's body just stepped into the dark cave, a terrible countercurrent swept directly over. This countercurrent came very unreasonably and directly dragged Sudbai backwards, along with Sophia's body. This means, it's like someone has come in this time and it's over. Puff. As a last resort, Sudbai could only choose to dive quickly, because the undercurrent gushing out of the dark cave was becoming more and more turbulent, threatening to disturb the direction and speed of the entire river. After emerging from the water, Sudbai grabbed something on the shore. When Sudbai found out what he was grabbing, he silently lowered his head and smiled. It turned out to be the wooden dock next to the cabin. A feeling of being set emerged in Sudbai's heart, which meant that there was a mysterious force controlling everything. This meant that this force would make him try not to deviate from the main storyline. In short, what it means is that all storytellers must work within the scope of this storyline and cannot deviate from the mainstream field of vision. However, this feeling made Sudbai very uncomfortable, just like being strangled by someone's neck while walking. Even if you want to struggle to survive, you have to continue walking according to the route drawn by others. The purple bell was wrapped around Sudbai's wrist. He didn't know how to use it. Although he knew that Sophia gave this to him and the pleading look she showed to him at the end must have some kind of meaning in it, but Sudbai, I don't want to think about it anymore. Facts have proven that once there is an entanglement of interests in the story world, many other things will become insignificant. Fatty and Yigu are the best examples. He doesn't even it is clear whether the message Sophia sent to him is really to convey some message or just to mislead him. However, let's make peace with what we have come. Sudbai went ashore and walked towards the cabin wetly. The door of the cabin was closed and locked from the inside. Sudbai stood at the door. There was no movement inside. Then, Sudbai simply raised his foot and kicked the door. The door was kicked open by Sudbai. There was no one in the living room, the fire had been completely extinguished, and a dark hole was revealed inside. Sudbai took a can of beer, opened it, took a sip, then bent down, holding the beer, and walked into the passage inside the furnace wall. The passage was very long and tortuous, but the general route was still sketched out in Sudbai's mind. It should be going down, getting deeper and deeper. When he walked out of the passage, Sudbai saw that the lights were brightly lit. These lights were not permanent lights, and they did not seem to burn for too long. It was probably because the opening of the passage caused the outside air to flow in and ignited the lights. In front, there is a space similar to the main hall, but the furnishings inside are very simple, with only one statue. This statue does not look like a so-called god, but more like an evil wizard. The wizard's hands hold a magic wand. At this time, Fatty and Yuga were respectively putting their hands on the wand in front of them. They were obviously taking something. Sudbai did not approach in a hurry, nor did he take the initiative to say hi to say hello. He just stood silently at the transitional position between the passage and the main hall, hiding his aura. Sudbai knew what would happen next, so the location he chose should be considered a relatively solid location in the underground building. Even if a serious landslide occurred, his location should not be greatly affected. There was a conversation between Yigu and Fatty, and Sudbai's name appeared in the conversation. Obviously, the two of them were very satisfied with the decision not to ask Sudbai to come down together, because there were only 2 wands and 3 people here, so why? At this time, the voice of the terror broadcast sounded in everyone's mind, announcing, "The prelude of terror has just begun." Then, in the next moment, the wizard's sculpture turned into dust and flew away, and the entire underground building completely collapsed at this time. Sudbai raised his head, watching the changes in the structure above him, while constantly fine-tuning his position against the wall. At this time, Sudbai even wanted to light a cigarette, but his clothes were already soaked, and there was nothing in his pocket. The cigarette is also naturally wet. Next time, if there is a chance, I will put the cigarette in the living room and not take it away. Sudbai himself felt that this would not be the last time. After all, he was still a long way from finding the source of the river. Finally, the landslide ended. The houses above had collapsed, and it was a mess below. However, moonlight could be seen in most of the rock gaps. Obviously, the underground buildings after the landslide were basically exposed to the outside. Sudbai pushed away a rock slab above his head, and then climbed out from underneath. Following the direction he remembered, he began to walk towards the original location of the sculpture. At this time, if nothing else happened, a group of clones were already in action. They had already begun to enter the plot and came in to prepare for killing and replacement. Sudbai didn't know the significance of this arrangement, because the people killed by the clones, it seems that after the next reset, they are still themselves, not the so-called clones. However, the horror broadcast was not unnecessary. It probably had its own profound meaning, but Sudbai couldn't see through it yet. Plop. The fat man lifted up a rock that was pressing on him, but his legs were also pressed down, almost deforming him. Moreover, although the fat man had good kung fu, he was following the path of Taoist strengthening after all. Faced with this situation, his abilities seemed somewhat useless. Seeing Sudbai coming, the fat man's face showed a look of surprise. He immediately reached down with one hand, took out a magic wand, and handed it to Sudbai. "Come on, Abai, take the stuff. I just got it, but it was actually trapped underneath. Please help me and pull me out." Being aware of current affairs and adaptable, Fatty has almost reached a watertight level in terms of being a person and doing things. Sudbai walked over with a smile and took the wand from the fat man. A flash of distress flashed in the fat man's eyes. Sudbai squatted down and began to help the fat man push away the rocks pressing on his legs. At this time, behind Sudbai, a stone suddenly trembled, floated, and then stabbed directly into the back of Sudbai's head. Boom! Subai seemed to have known it for a long time. He turned around and grabbed the stabbing stone with one hand. The palm of his hand was dripping with blood, but the smile on Subai's face never changed. The fat man pursed his lips, and then looked in the other direction with some complaints. Why bother? Do you have to make the relationship work? Moreover, you took action and you didn't kill him. Subai was not in a hurry to help the fat man push the stone anymore, but walked to the other side. He used his wand to move away some gravel. Below, Gugu's face was exposed, and Gugu's whole person was almost pressed underneath. That was a big stone, and even though he was seriously injured, Yigu couldn't save himself. When Subai came, Yigu was just a little nervous, but when he found that Subai calmly took the wand handed over by the fat man, a look of resentment appeared on Yigu's face. You just took the fat man's wand. What about mine? You definitely want to take it, right? Then I'll let you take it. However, now, Subai was standing next to Yigu's face, with a look of surprise on Yigu's face. I was shocked. Abai, it was you. I thought something was approaching. I'm sorry, please help Fatty and I out. It's so uncomfortable to be pressed down there. Good. Subai said. Subsequently, Subai picked up the magic wand and waved it directly. Boom. Yigu's head was smashed to pieces by Subai, and a pool of blood and brain matter even splashed onto the fat man on the side. The fat man's lips squirmed, a little. Unbelievable. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 74. Subai squatted down, stretched out his hand, and stroked the face that had been completely beaten by himself. The disgustingly sticky blood and brain smeared Subai's entire palm. Subai raised his palm and put it on the tip of his nose. Smelled. Fatty watched the scene from the side, his breathing became rapid, and he suddenly felt that the Subai in front of him became a little unfamiliar to him. Is this still the young man who always seems to have a lukewarm temper when doing things? Subai did not eat the brains and blood, but shook his hand to get rid of the dirty things on his hand. Then he put his hand into the stone crevice under Gu's body, fiddled with it, and took out another wand. Subai held two wands in his hands, one was turquoise and the other was sky blue. They were both restrained, but when he held them in his hands, it was as if he could feel the heartbeats of these two wands. It's obviously not a mortal thing. Finally, Subai's eyes fell on the fat man again. It was obvious that Subai was hesitating. Fatty could also see that Subai was hesitating, and he didn't dare to express his anger at this time. At this time, Subai raised his head and looked at the sky. Dawn was not far away. You still have things to do. I won't kill you, Subai said. The fat man nodded vigorously. You can take care of yourself. After saying that, Subai stood up and left, disappearing directly into the dense forest. There was a lot of cold sweat on the fat man's face. He wiped it with his hands, and then began to use his own strength to slowly move his legs out from the rock slab little by little. At this time, the two legs, the flesh and blood were mutilated, and even the bones were exposed. Finally, after a quarter of an hour of intense pain and struggle, the fat man finally pulled his legs out, but now his legs were completely useless and he could only move with his own hands. However, at this moment, an exaggerated voice came from behind the fat man. The fat man turned his head and his eyes suddenly opened wide. Because he saw an identical version of himself staring at him with murderous intent. After entering the forest, Subai began to move quickly. Subai tied two wands with rattan and tied them to his back. He needed to rush to that place to enter the next reset. Logically speaking, Sophia can't come this time. The black-haired woman should be there if nothing else happens, and there should be two of them, but it doesn't rule out the possibility that other people will come to that place. After all, the last time I went to that place, I also had a kind of bad luck. Of course, the biggest reason may be that I have had great doubts about this story world deep in my heart, so I was attracted by it. Of course, there are many prerequisites for getting to that place. Before that, you can't die first, and you can't fail to pass the level of your own clone. While Subai was running, he discovered that in a parallel area 50 meters away from him, there was also a figure running as fast as himself. Finally, Subai stopped, and so did the other party. He is still exactly the same, but this time, it is obviously different from the last time. The other party's chi is very obscure, and it seems that he has been constantly drifting between the two. Subai looked at him, and he looked at Subai. The two people just looked at each other. "I'm in a hurry," Subai said. "I know," the other party replied. Obviously, the other party knew a lot of things. Every reset was also an update for these clones. Then, "Come on." Subai rushed over quickly, and the clone's body changed rapidly at this time, becoming extremely thin. The whole person suddenly became skin and bones, and there seemed to be two faint flames burning in his eyes. During Subai's sprint, two fangs appeared at the corners of his mouth, his eyes became extremely deep and strange, and his body became more and more agile. Boom! Subai's nails pierced the clone's chest, and then left immediately, avoiding the danger of frostbite on his fingers by the clone, leaving several finger marks on the clone's chest. The clone roared and circled his arms. In an instant, with him as the center of the circle, there was ice condensation for several meters around him. At the same time, his two skinny palms slapped Subai horizontally. Subai quickly retreated, avoiding the clone's palm, but at the same time, after retreating a certain distance, Subai exerted force on his waist, turned around on the spot, moved his leg diagonally backwards, and kicked the clone directly in the lower abdomen. The clone was shaken back a few steps and hit a tree, making the tree shudder. In both fights, Subai had the advantage. Although the clone's injuries were not serious, the situation of being suppressed when facing the original was obviously unacceptable to him. In his opinion, he and Subai, they are exactly the same. In fact, I am more ruthless than Subai in terms of character. Therefore, I can definitely beat Subai. At least, I will be evenly matched. However, when they fight, Subai is the steady one. If you suppress yourself completely, then what is the meaning of your own existence? What is the meaning of existence of a replica that cannot replace the original one? Probably the clone felt that Subai's speed and agility had been greatly improved in the vampire state, so when he was defeated in 2 consecutive fights, the clone also changed his state from the zombie state to the vampire state. A skinny and scary zombie turned into a strange and cold vampire in the blink of an eye. This sudden change in the style of painting is still very obvious. Subai smiled. He didn't know where his superior mentality towards clones came from. It was probably a psychological influence due to the fact that he was his original self. In fact, the clones always regarded themselves as clones in their hearts. It's just the body. This is really the essential difference. For Subai, his sensitivity and speed can indeed be greatly improved in the vampire state, but the attack power is really not obvious enough. Therefore, after switching the clone to the vampire state, Subai's body he began to lose weight slowly, and finally turned into a zombie that seemed to be cursed. This time, the clone came forward on his own initiative. The clone's speed did indeed increase a lot after quickly approaching Subai. The clone's claws directly scraped at Subai's neck, but Subai didn't seem to resist at all, just spreading his arms. Hiss! Hiss! 2 crisp sounds were heard, and 2 claw marks appeared on Subai's neck, and black gelatinous blood flowed out, indicating that he was obviously injured. However, the attack power of the clone in the vampire state cannot be praised unless he stabs Subai's neck with his fangs. However, Subai is not the Jumei who was imprisoned by Yigu. How could he let the clone just keep piercing your fangs into your body? After the clone succeeded, he was ready to retreat just like Subai did before. However, he suddenly found that a wall of ice appeared behind him, blocking his retreat position. Subai was sure that the opponent just wanted to inflict a small injury on himself and then retreated, so he simply did not set up any defense for his own body. He simply used the relatively strong body defense in the zombie state to absorb the attack of the clone, and turned around and suppressed the copy's movement space. Boom! The clone was stuck, and Subai rushed forward, pressing his shoulders against the clone's body. Boom! The ice wall shattered, and the clone was knocked out and fell to the ground. Many of his ribs were probably broken. He struggled for a while when he got up but failed in the end. Subai silently took out the wand. Blood was dripping from the wound on his neck. Some of it actually extended to the green wand tied to his back. After sucking his own blood, the wand he actually started to tremble actively, as if he couldn't bear it and wanted to attack. This made Subai a little surprised and a little happy. It was quite simple and straightforward to activate the wand with blood. Holding the wand, Subai walked towards the clone lying on the ground, and directly used the most domineering method to smash the wand down like a fire stick. The clone put its arms and legs on the ground and moved quickly, barely able to hide. After Subai's blow. Boom! But the wand still made a hole in the same place. Its power was very satisfying to Subai. He didn't know any magic, let alone any spells. Being able to use part of the wand in this way was actually considered a skill. What an unexpected surprise! However, there was a snapping sound from the bones of the clone. The clone reluctantly recovered from his injuries and stood up, but it was swaying for a while. However, the clone seemed to have received some surprise, and stretched out its hand to touch the fallen leaves. He groped among the pile and took out a cyan wand, then cut open his palm with his nails, dripping his own blood on the wand, and the wand suddenly started to tremble. So, that's how it's used. The clone looked at Subai with a proud look on his face, meaning, look, what you have, I also have, I am no worse than you, although this kind of comparison mentality has already put you at a big disadvantage. However, when Subai saw the clone taking out the magic wand that had been hidden here for a long time, his whole body felt like an electric shock, and his thoughts began to collide rapidly. Finally, a look of anger and distortion appeared on his face. Yes. At this moment, Subai finally understood the purpose of terrorist broadcasting's arrangement of clones to kill the original body. I finally fully understand what my situation is like. For a moment, a great fear filled Subai's heart, along with a deep fear. So, that's it? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 75. Horror broadcasts will not be so boring that they are useless. This is something that does not need to be studied and proved. After all, horror broadcasts have always adhered to the traditional principle of horror and storytelling, and all elements that violate the story will be guided by it, or even forced correction. Therefore, the so-called appearance of clones must have its necessary reasons, and it will never be aimless. If you can know the reason, then it is equivalent to taking the most important and critical step to complete the task. Therefore, from the appearance of this clone of myself, from the first conversation with the clone, Subai had been observing and thinking, and it was unlikely that this guy appeared just to delay time or to conduct a specious assessment. Moreover, the quality of these clones was really not high, even if they were almost completely equal in strength. Under any circumstances, Subai can steadily kill the opponent. Unless they encounter a very special accident, they will not have much chance at all. Moreover, they will not hunt as a team, but only one-on-one. It is even more intriguing to single out one's own body. However, it was precisely because Subai had been observing his clone that when the clone also took out the wand, A flash of lightning suddenly flashed across Sudbai's mind. He caught it, he caught it. At the same time, I finally understand. When did you get the wand? Just now. To be more specific in terms of time, it was after the tone of the horror broadcast was broadcast and after the clone appeared. In what mode are replicas replicated? It should be copied according to the original state before the last reset. Sudbai remembered the first time he met his own copy. At that time, he was attacked by the terrible blood leech, which caused his own corpse poison. By chance, he became another state similar to his vampire state, which also greatly improved his strength. Then, the sound of a terrifying broadcast rang in his mind, and then his clone found him. However, his clone did not have zombie blood. This actually means that the existence of the replica is a copy of the last reset body, rather than a dynamic and synchronously updated copy. There is actually a time difference here. So, according to Sudbai's memory, the clone he encountered this time should be himself in vampire and zombie states, which was the state he was in when he went to the river to cross the river last time. Originally, all the performances of the clone were carried out according to Sudbai's speculations and conjectures. However, when the clone took out the wand that had been prepared long ago, Sudbai was stunned. The clone is actually the shadow of the last reset, or the same thing as the template. So, if the clone also has a wand, it means a very simple and clear thing, that is, during the last reset, Sudbai already has a magic wand. However, this was contrary to Sudbai's memory, and even felt completely contradictory. However, summing up the special nature of this story world, there is a possibility that can perfectly explain this seemingly completely contradictory problem. That is, after the reset, Sudbai didn't know it, but it had already happened, even happened many times. Since the last story world, I have been reset. He is no longer a real participant in this game, but has almost become a supporting role, an NPC. Others are constantly participating and resetting all this, and Sudbai can only be the passive one to bear it. Just like how Sudbai felt exactly the same as when he looked at Fatty now. In fact, to a large extent, the two sides are just laughing at the same time. Yigu and Fatty didn't know that Sudbai had experienced these things. Sudbai had previously thought that he was at a transcendent advantage, but the fact was that in the eyes of others, he might also be in conflict with his serious relationship with Fatty. There is no difference at first glance. I was repeating this reset. In the last reset, I had already obtained the magic wand from Yigu and Fatty. However, I failed to obtain the qualification to cross the river, causing the three people to cross the river. Although the memory was retained, the others, including Sudbai himself, were forced to erase their memories and start the reset again. This is true, and there is basically nothing wrong with it. At the same time, this is also a gruesome result. Sudbai's palms trembled slightly. Until now, his heart has not completely returned to calm. However, he knew what he should do now. Since he failed to get the qualification to cross the river last time, he would not be able to cross the river this time. Must get it? I would rather let others reset and have my memory erased than let myself continue to lose opportunities and be reset. Now, time is of the essence. Sudbai raised the green wand in his hand and smashed it directly at his clone. The clone also raised the green wand in his hand. The two wands collided together, and both sides threw their own wands. The blood was on it, so at the beginning, the two identical green sticks exploded directly during the collision. Hiss. Sudbai took a breath. His entire right arm was almost broken into pieces, dripping with blood, and it was too horrible to look at. The injury on the clone's side was even more serious, with wounds all over his body. It was already very difficult to maintain a standing posture at this time. Sudbai raised his left arm again, blood soaked into another sky blue stick, and then he smashed it at the copy standing in front of him with difficulty but firmness. The clone roared, but his body was blown apart by the second wand held by Subai at the next moment. The torn body of the clone fell to the ground, looking very miserable. It seems that last time, I only got a green stick and not a blue stick, so there was only one stick around the clone. This also directly caused the clone to do this again. Die simply in front of Subai. Looking at the mutilated corpses of the clones, Subai held the magic wand in his hand. The horror broadcast forcibly added the role of these clones, which was actually a reminder. The source of the river triggered this reset game, and as on the one hand, the truly dominant horror broadcasters are happy to see this, but on the other hand, they also forcefully add a hand to give the listeners a chance, so that they will not all be confused and completely lost in this reset again and again. First, giving the audience a chance also adds more interest and possibility to the story. Subai ran very fast. This time, he did not hesitate or pause. Although dawn still took some time to arrive, Subai still did not feel relaxed at all. Last time, I probably only owned a green wand, so killing the replica that didn't have a wand at that time shouldn't be very difficult, nor would it take too long, but I still bought it. One of the 3 qualifications has been erased and the memory has been reset. This time, there is plenty of time. Will the ending be the same? Finally, Subai came to the river and reached that location. There were already 3 people there. One of them was a black-haired woman. She was standing by the river with her bare feet, as if she was playing in the water or looking in the mirror, looking very peaceful. There are 2 more men, both of whom are Western men. One is Jack, who is considered the leader of the Western group of people in this story world, and the other is a little thinner. This man, Subai, he has seen, and even killed, a Western listener strengthened by elven blood. There are already 3 people in the 3 places, and Subai is the 4th person to come here. The eyes of the 3 people who had arrived long ago fell on Subai, the uninvited guest standing in the 4th position. "You're late," the black-haired girl said. Jack and another elf enhancer stood in front of Subai. Obviously, no one would be willing to give up this kind of opportunity and qualification. The black-haired girl shrugged and said in a distressed way, "The place is really full." It seems that the 3 people who arrived early are preparing to form an alliance to deal with the 4th person. However, the tense atmosphere completely disappeared in Subai's next sentence. "Okay, then I'll wait for the next one." After saying that, Subai walked directly to a hillside in the distance and sat down. It was far enough away from the position by the river, but yet both sides could see clearly. Waiting for the next one. Jack and the Western youth next to him looked at each other in disbelief. Did this Easterner regard this as a bus? Just wait for the next one after this one leaves? Is it that easy? However, at this time, the dawn appeared. A purple light appeared in the river in this area. The black-haired woman was the first to walk into the river, and disappeared after being wrapped in purple light. At this time, Subai slowly stood up and walked towards the side. Jack stared at Subai's footsteps, then slowly retreated into the river, and then he disappeared directly. The elf enhancer pointed his bow and arrow at Subai while walking into the river. Purple light enveloped him and he completely disappeared. From the beginning to the end, Subai walked very slowly. The 3 places were used up before he came slowly. However, Subai also walked directly into the river. The purple light that had almost disappeared was actually here. Time regrouped and gradually enveloped Subai. A figure emerged from the water and stared at Subai coldly. "You know," the other party's voice was filled with anger and unwillingness. "You underestimate human wisdom, you also underestimate human ability, even if you so diligently every time. However, this game, eventually, it will collapse." In Subai's mind, the gesture Sophia made for herself before she died, first with 3 fingers raised, then with 2 fingers raised. The qualification quota is indeed 3 people each time. But Among the three people every time, there is one. Not actually human. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 76. The figure of the black-haired woman was slowly revealed, and she looked at Subai coldly. At this time, she had lost the detachment and indifference she had before, and she showed a kind of hysterical expression in the vague sight. The smell is like that of an extremely ugly woman whose thick makeup was washed away all at once, with anger, shame, and a hint of helplessness. Yes, I underestimate you, but it's not you I underestimate, it's the woman named Sophia. Without her entanglement with me, which cost me so much thought and energy, it's impossible to get to this point. The black-haired woman showed a serious smile. But don't even think about leaving here alive. Subai shook his head and thought to himself, we didn't have the luxury of leaving alive. After all, this is a group story world. It's enough if we can survive. As for others, if they die, they will die. The purple energy condensed around Subai was not dispersed, but it did not make Subai disappear. It remained in a stalemate here. What, are you scared? Subai looked at the black-haired woman, don't you dare to reset me anymore. The basic concept of this story world is actually a very simple time reset method. There are 20 participants in it, and 3 people can be reset each time. However, one of the places is occupied by this black-haired woman every time. This means that the black-haired woman has abruptly subtracted one person from the 3 places, from 3 people to 2 people. This is a decrease in the difficulty of the game. Moreover, although there is only one less person, the savings will be a massive amount of pressure. However, this time, Subai seized the time and allowed the black-haired woman and the 2 Westerners to enter the river first. He himself stepped into the section of the river just in time before it ended, which was equivalent to this fan. Before the door was closed, Subai had already put his hand in, and even stepped half of his body in. He had already entered, but the owner of the door did not dare to let Subai in. Because, once Subai enters, the black-haired woman will lose this quota, because she is not a human, she is an incarnation of this river. It is okay to act like a fool, but as a real audience, a real person also enters this section. When the river water enters this group of purple light, he will naturally occupy a quota, an undisputed quota. At the same time, the black-haired woman who is confused will be instantly disqualified. In short, Subai stood here, held his position, and directly forced the black-haired woman out. The reason why the purple light did not make Subai disappear is because once it is reset this time, the black-haired woman will become the target of the reset, and the game created by this river will also completely lose control of the game. There is more than one Sophia and more than one Subai. Among the 20 listeners, there will definitely be people who discover the problems in this story one after another. Without the black-haired woman's various loopholes in it, without her patchwork, this game would be impossible. It simply can't go on. Next time, everything will not be reset. I am very curious about how many of you can survive. The black-haired woman's pupils were red, and she was obviously planning to break the jar. Actually, I admire your struggle. Subai looked at the river. Subai still didn't know what the relationship was between the story world and the horror broadcast, but in front of the horror broadcast, as a listener, he seemed so powerless and pale, and this river is really taking the initiative to wrestle with the terrorist broadcast this time. The ending is actually destined to be tragic, but it is still tragic enough. The purple light finally flourished, and Subai's figure disappeared on the spot. Everything. Reset. One last reset. When he opened his eyes, Subai was a little surprised. He was not standing on the side of the road anymore, but sitting next to the stove in the cabin. Opposite Subai, there was a Western woman, Sophia. At this time, Sophia also opened her eyes and looked at Subai. "Hello," Subai said, standing up at the same time to show respect. You don't need to thank me. I originally wanted to inform Jack, but every time, I missed him a little bit. And, to some extent, Jack is indeed much worse than you, so I chose to inform you. Subai didn't care about this. He looked around and found that the surroundings were a little dirty, and there was no beer or sausage. Why were the two of us put here first this time? Subai asked, because obviously, judging from the situation here, Fatty and Yigu have not yet come to this cabin. This is the last reset. The memories from many previous resets will be restored, and everyone will be restored. During so many resets, how many people have you and I killed? How many people will be accumulated? Anger and resentment. Sophia stood up and walked to the window. This time the story is coming to an end. For the sake of storytelling, the horror broadcast must add a climax, a bloody and exciting climax. If the two of us were placed directly next to other listeners, everyone would directly start killing each other. What's the point? This ending is definitely not what he likes. So, everything here is actually under the control of horror broadcasters. In the eyes of horror broadcasters, this river is just a clown who comes on stage purely to give the audience some fun. I respect this river very much. Sophia pointed to the river flowing next to the cabin. It also deserves our respect. Subai nodded and walked to Sophia. By the way, have you found the source? You've already guessed what it is, haven't you? Sophia looked at Subai. Then what we have to do now is to find him. First of all, we need to be able to get out of this forest. As soon as Sophia finished speaking, waves of roaring roars like a tidal wave came from the bottom of the river. Immediately afterwards, corpses that had been swimming around at the bottom of the river crazily climbed up to the shore. Began to run towards here. Their goal was very simple and clear, that was the cabin, and that was the two people in the cabin. Subai took the remaining sky blue stick in his hand and waved it like a baseball bat. You use it as a stick. The corners of Sophia's mouth twitched uncontrollably, as if she saw an idiot driving a Cayenne to transport swill. Subai did not answer this question, because the current situation is that the wand in his hand is just a stick. His vampire blood has great flaws, and it is even nondescript now. He cannot redeem the vampire magic. This a magic wand, let's keep it that way for now. Let's go, rush out. Sophia put her hands in her pockets, but two vines instantly grew in front of the window, knocking away the two walking corpses that were about to rush over. The already rotten wall of the cabin also collapsed, and Sophia walked out. Subai took the wand and hit the corpses with a stick. Subai smashed the heads of 7 or 8 walking corpses in a row. By the way, there are good things under the wooden house. There are 2 more wands like this, Subai reminded. We don't have enough time. This is the last time. We have to race against time. Besides, do you know the formation? I'm just kindly reminding you, Subai said and smashed the head of a zombie with another stick. After this story is over, you go to London to find me. I want your wand, and I will give you an exchange that satisfies you. Deal. Subai agreed readily. In this way, Subai and Sophia followed the walking corpses all the way out. However, what made Subai a little confused was that there were only a lot of walking corpses at the beginning, but then they gradually decreased. Even after the 2 people walked for a long time, there were even a few walking corpses. Not a single walking corpse was missing. And, more importantly, in this forest, there were many, many more terrifying beings than the walking dead, but none of them appeared to stop Subai and Sophia. However, along the way, Subai saw the corpses of many listeners. Some had their blood sucked dry, some had their souls extracted and their bodies were well preserved with a smile, some had their bodies chopped in half, and some had their bodies covered in green and poisoned bodies. The death was very tragic and the scene was very intense. It was obvious that unlike Subai and Sophia, the other listeners suffered a violent storm after entering the forest. They were not just ordinary walking corpses. Later, Subai saw Yigu. Yigu's lower abdomen had been cut open, his intestines were lying on the ground, and he was hanged on a tree. There were obvious traces of fighting around him. More and more people died, but the obstacles Subai and Sophia encountered began to become almost non-existent. Finally, Sophia and Subai walked out of the forest and arrived at the convenience store. Sophia took a deep breath and began to adjust her condition. In her opinion, she was about to face the most severe test. The previous calm was just the foreshadowing before the storm. However, Subai took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and walked forward easily. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Didn't you say you respect it?" Subai asked. "It is our Chinese tradition to give a cigarette to someone you respect." Subai just opened the door of the convenience store casually. The black boss was still standing in front of the counter, watching the TV in front of him. Seeing Subai coming, the black boss didn't say hello and continued watching TV. Subai threw a cigarette at the black boss. The black boss reached out his hand, caught it, and held it in his mouth, but he continued to stare at the TV screen. Subai lit a cigarette for himself first, and then walked to the black boss with a lighter. The lighter lit up the flame. The black boss turned his head sideways and let the cigarette in his mouth light up. Then he took a sip and blew out a smoke ring. "It's like a person finally breathing a sigh of relief." "Brother, what TV show am I so fascinated by?" Subai came over and stood next to the black boss. At this time, Sophia, who was nervous and doubtful, also opened the door of the convenience store and walked in. When she saw Subai and the black boss brother standing together, smoking and watching TV, she couldn't help biting her lip. She couldn't understand everything in front of her. The black boss took another puff of cigarette and finally began to answer Subai's question. "A variety show." It was indeed a reality show. Subai had already seen it, but what was constantly being shown on the TV screen were scenes of listeners dying tragically. "I still want to meet the people who perform the best." The black boss grinned and smiled, because his skin was very dark, so his teeth were very white against the background. "Finally, thank you for your respect." "Certainly. Thank you for the cigarette, too." After the black boss finished speaking, he flicked the ashes from his cigarette. Subai, Sophia, and the few remaining listeners finally heard the voice of the terrifying broadcast in their minds. The main mission is completed, and the survivors return to the real world. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 77. In the hotel room, Subai was sitting on a chair and Fatty was sitting on the bed. Neither of them spoke, and they really had nothing to say. "Even if we were good friends before, we went to whoring together and carried guns together." Even before entering the story world, the three of them all had their own calculations and selfish intentions, but at least they were able to maintain the surface enthusiasm and harmony. However, after experiencing the story world this time, when those deep things in human nature are exposed by the sun, it is basically unnecessary to do any superficial things, especially after just looking at it. Subai picked up a bottle of water on the table, took a sip, then put the water back, and pointed to the room card that was still inserted into the wall at the door for power supply. "You can check out later." Okay, please walk slowly," Fatty shouted. It seemed that Fatty's mood recovered quite quickly. Subai left the hotel directly. Subai held the sky blue wand directly in his hand. There was no need to worry about attracting any attention. People on the road would think that Subai was just holding a cosplay prop. He hailed a taxi on the side of the road, and half an hour later, Subai arrived at the nursing home. In fact, the time between entering the story world and leaving the story world is only a short moment. In the real world, there is not much time. It is impossible for ninth brother to suddenly wake up in such a short period of time, but for as far as Subai was concerned, it had already been quite a while, so he should come and see ninth brother. Looking at brother ninth who was still lying on the bed in the ward, Subai didn't know what he should feel in his heart. In fact, deep down in his heart, he was a little envious of the fact that he didn't know anything and was just in a coma quietly. Ninth brother. Of course, Subai also knew that having such thoughts only meant that he was being too pretentious. Originally, when Subai realized his desire to kill, he also panicked in his heart, because he felt that he had deviated from a normal life, and even deviated from the order of existence of this society. After all, he is a social animal. When he finds that he has gradually deviated from this circle, he feels lonely. Negative emotions such as fear will gradually come over you. However, now, Subai no longer panics or worries about this, because the path he is taking now and the position he is in are much more extreme than the ones he took before, and there is no way back in sight. At this time, Subai's cell phone suddenly rang. He picked it up and looked at the call notification. It was actually from his home. He answered the call, but there was no sound from the other side. After Subai asked a few times, there was no sound from the other side. Only then did a cat meow. Subai then remembered that Ji Xiang had been left at his home by Li Ji. After leaving the nursing home, Subai went to a supermarket to buy some cat food on the way home. He originally wanted to prepare some cat litter, but considering Ji Xiang's aloof appearance, he shouldn't be a pet that excretes everywhere. When he opened the door of his house, Subai saw no sign of Ji Xiang. When he went to the second floor and opened the door of the master bedroom, he saw a black cat sitting on the windowsill, looking out at something that was not very blue. Sky. Subai walked to Ji Xiang, who looked at Subai and then continued to look at the sky. Miss her. Meow. At this time, Subai's phone vibrated. He picked up the phone and saw that it was a WeChat group. This WeChat group was the WeChat group of his college classmates. Originally, Subai had set up a block, but at this time someone happened to be at OWN. Under that message, there was also a preview message sent by the horror broadcasting public account. When Subai came back, he clicked it and took a look. He got 200 story points and Sophia got the remaining 300 story points. This should be according to the it was distributed based on contribution, which is enough to show that although it was Subai who got stuck in the reset rhythm in the end, before that, a large part of the contribution came from Sophia. That very smart British woman, Subai, only maintained herself and awakened through resets again and again, but it was Sophia who had been paving the way and even delivering messages to others. However, Subai didn't care much about the number of story points. He didn't have anything suitable to exchange for it now. Fortunately, in the last story world, he had truly turned on the zombie state, and his strength was greatly improved. Promotion, these are really no worse than going to the WeChat store to redeem them. There is a woman in the WeChat group at Subai. Subai is not very impressed with her. She should be a classmate in the same department as him. I heard that you are in Chengdu. Subai replied yes. We are also in Chengdu, and we are going on a self-driving trip to Zhezhou tomorrow. You are a local, will you welcome us? Subai pursed his lips and looked at Ji Xiang again. Suddenly, he felt that he should go out for a walk no matter how tense and bloody the story world was. He really needed to adjust his mood after returning to the real world. I can't just stay at home with Jixiang and wait silently for the next story world to come. In that case, my life will be too monotonous, all black and white. After thinking about it, Subai replied okay and then sent his mobile phone number to the female classmate. Soon, the phone call came. Hey, is this Subai? Yes, it's me. There are 6 of us here, 4 are classmates from our school, and 2 are lovers of 2 of them. Where are you? I have a pet, a cat, Subai replied. The other party was stunned for a moment, and then asked, you just bring a cat? By the way, Subai, do you have a car? Yes, Subai replied. Well, we are staying in a hotel in Jinyu district now. How about we have dinner together in the evening? That's okay, just send me the gathering place tomorrow morning. Okay, hee, that's great. We were originally worried that there wouldn't be room for one person in the car. Subai hung up the phone. He knew why the female classmate was looking for him. She really couldn't fit 6 people in one car, so he came to look for him with the attitude of giving it a try. Fortunately, this was a pillow for Subai when he was short of sleep. Holding Jixiang in his arms, Jixiang surprisingly did not maintain his cold demeanor this time. Obviously, this cat also had moments when he was depressed. Take you out for a walk, have some fun, and let's relax together. The next morning, Subai went to a car rental agency to rent an Audi, and then drove to the entrance of the Ring Expressway. Jixiang was sitting in the passenger seat of Subai. It seemed that the atmosphere of a trip had made the cat feel much better, and he began to act cool again. After waiting for 20 minutes, a BMW drove up in front of Subai, and everyone except the driver got out of the car. There were 3 men and 3 women in total, all young, looking youthful in their early 20s. However, when the car was allocated, 4 people came up from Subai's side. 3 people sat in the back seat and 1 person sat in the passenger seat. There were only 2 people in the BMW, but Subai's Audi was so packed that Ji Xiang had no room and could only lie on Subai's lap. In this regard, Subai didn't say anything. The girl sitting in the passenger seat, who sent Subai to ask Subai on WeChat, her name was Sunuan, started to complain dissatisfiedly. It's really interesting. She invited us to come to Chengdu for a self-driving trip. In the end, it was just her and her boyfriend in the same car. So many of us were crowded together. Okay, Nuan, isn't her boyfriend also covering all the hotels and meals along the way? We can just bear with it. Besides, this car is quite big and it's not crowded. A girl sitting in the back seat with her boyfriend advised. Humph, it's great to have a few rich men. Isn't it just that you have a rich boyfriend? Look at her beauty. The reason why she invited us out this time is just to show off, Sunuan continued. Little did they know that without the girl's boyfriend's full support, they would not have participated in this trip. Subai rolled down the car window and lit a cigarette. He was not very interested in what happened between these students. The BMW in front started to move, and Subai followed it. There were 2 men and 2 women sitting in Subai's car. Sunuan and another man named Sun Lin were single, and there was also a young couple named Zhu Tingting and Lu Gang. These 4 people were all from Jiangsu. Sunuan complained for a long time. After the car drove out of Chengdu and entered the Dujiangjian area, the emotions of the 4 people were also aroused. Lu Gang and Sun Lin began to show off their historical knowledge in front of the girls. From the origin of Dujiangjian they talked about the Warring States period and then the unification of the Qin dynasty. The 2 girls, Sunuan and Zhu Tingting, listened with gusto. From time to time, a few people would make a joke. The atmosphere in the car was indeed good. When the Wenchuan sign appeared on the highway, Sunuan immediately became excited and took out her mobile phone to take a picture of the road sign. It's so scary. I've arrived in Wenchuan. Yes, we have arrived in Wenchuan. The emotions of the 2 men and 2 women in the car were suddenly aroused. At this time, there was actually still 20 kilometers away from Wenchuan, and it started to rain. The gloomy atmosphere suited the mood and atmosphere of the people on the bus. When the car actually drove into Wenchuan, Lu Gang suddenly said, "Tell me, are there many ghosts here? Are there many undiscovered bodies buried down here?" "Ah, don't say that, I'm scared." Lu Gang's girlfriend Zhu Tingting was so frightened that she buried her head in Lu Gang's arms. "It's really annoying, I deliberately scare people." "Hey, what are you afraid of?" "Let me tell you, I checked the travel route before and knew that I was going to Wenchuan, so I went to ask for an amulet." Sunuan looked like I was awesome. Nuan is still attentive, but you don't have to be afraid, I'm here. Sun Lin obviously has a good impression of Sunuan and plans to take advantage of this trip to launch an offensive. If it doesn't work out, let's talk to Lanlin and her boyfriend. Let's stay in Wenchuan tonight. Maybe there will be ghosts knocking on the door at night. Haha, that's a good suggestion. Many people have died here, so there should be many ghosts. Sunuan was posting the photo she just took on WeChat Moments. I'm in Wenchuan now, so I'm so scared. Subai frowned. He had basically been silent along the way and finally spoke. Sorry everyone, this is Wenchuan New City. The Wenchuan city where the earthquake occurred is quite far away from here, so if there are no corpses here, there is nothing wrong with it. Moreover, some jokes are disrespectful to the original deceased. As a human being, it is better to have a certain baseline. After Subai finished speaking, the faces of the 4 people in the car were not very good looking, and they looked very embarrassed. This was equivalent to being slapped in front of Subai's face, and Subai still held the high point of reason, so they had no way to refute. What? However, at this moment, Zhu Tingting, who had been lying in Lu Gang's arms, suddenly trembled and started foaming at the mouth, which scared her boyfriend Lu Gang and screamed. Sunuan and Sun Lin also screamed together. Even Subai was a little surprised at this time. He turned on the right turn signal and pulled over, wondering in his heart. Is this retribution coming so quickly? A while ago, Long was not very well and the update time was not fixed, which made it inconvenient for many readers to wait for the update. Now let's fix the update time. Starting from tomorrow, there will be 1 chapter at 8 AM and 2 chapters at 8 PM every day. If there is any unexpected delay, Dragon will send a single chapter to notify everyone in advance. For those who feel that there are too few updates and are not enough to watch, don't worry. Horror broadcast will be available on August 1st, and then the Dragon Society will begin to break out. Don't panic, hold on tight to the dragon. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 78. The car stopped on the highway. Subai unlocked the car door. Sunuan and Sun Lin immediately opened the door and got out of the car. Immediately afterwards, Zhu Tingting's boyfriend Lu Gang also got out of the car shivering. The previous stories were exaggerated and added to the Subai's warning made the 3 of them subconsciously think that Zhu Tingting was really getting retribution from a ghost, and she looked very frightened and panicked. Subai was also a little speechless. Sunuan and Sun Lin were in a hurry to get out of the car. Fortunately, Lu Gang, as Zhu Tingting's boyfriend, actually ignored his girlfriend like this. It was really a bit wrong. After getting out of the car and opening the rear door, Subai grabbed Zhu Tingting's shoulders and carried her out of the car. Zhu Tingting's body was still twitching, and the foam in her mouth continued to spit out, a bit like epilepsy. Crazy meaning. Laying the girl down on the ground, Subai touched the girl's forehead with his hand. As for whether it was the revenge of the ghost or his own physical problem, Subai really couldn't tell the difference. For now, it seemed that the only solution was to beat the girl. It's 120, but this is on a highway, not in a city, so calling 120 is not very efficient. At this moment, Subai suddenly frowned because he saw a man walking towards here. The man was wearing a black cassock and holding a string of Buddhist beads in his hand. He had a bald head, a handsome face, and a compassionate look. Debai's appearance could not be said to be too young, nor could he be said to be old. In short, he gave people a sense of uprightness and peace. The other party should have been sitting in a van before, and the van also parked on the right side. Amitabha, donor, could you let this poor monk have a look, the monk said after reciting the Buddha's name. Subai subconsciously wanted to refuse. The monk's appearance was a little too coincidental. Being too coincidental meant that it was a bit deliberate and unusual. If he had to choose, Subai would rather Fatty come and take a look. Although his relationship with Fatty had dropped to zero, Fatty would not refuse to help someone see a doctor. As for this monk, Subai didn't know the ins and outs of it. "Master, please help," Sunuan begged at this time. Sun Lin and Lu Gang also clasped their hands and bowed to the monk. Obviously, this monk was regarded as a life-saving straw by them. The monk just looked at Subai and ignored the other three people. Subai smiled, took a step back, and made a gesture of invitation to Hishan. The monk then walked in front of the mountain. He placed one hand on Zhu Tingting's eyebrows and the other on Zhu Tingting's lower abdomen. Then he let out a loud shout. Zhu Tingting sat up suddenly and mouthed. He let out a long, full cough with a foul smell, and then slowly opened his eyes, as if he had finally returned to normal. Amitba, the female donor, is only too frightened and has been feeling unwell recently, which is why she is in this situation. Moreover, the female donor should have a family history of epilepsy. Hearing these words, Lu Gang's expression immediately changed. His girlfriend actually has epilepsy? When Sunuan and Sun Lin heard this, they knew it was not a ghost, and they were no longer afraid. However, they looked at Zhu Tingting with a kind of disgust. Subai stood aside and touched his nose. These college students are really very realistic, and the city is not deep enough. Even if they dislike others, why should they show it on their faces so obviously? Why bother? The monk clasped his hands to Subai and recited the Buddha's name again. The female donor does not have a high-frequency disease, so there is no need to worry about it. Since the female donor is fine, I will leave now. Subai also clasped his hands and returned the greeting. If you dare to ask the master's Dharma name, then ask him where he placed the dish. It's just a trivial matter, it doesn't matter. If we are destined, we will definitely meet. The monk appeared to be calm and indifferent, and indeed he had the air of an outsider. After saying this, he walked directly to the van in front of him, and the van drove away quickly. Seeing that Zhu Tingting was indeed fine, Subai immediately shouted to everyone. Get in the car and leave quickly. Don't delay. The mountain road will be difficult to walk at night. Only then did everyone get in the car. Their positions in the car were the same as before, but Lu Gang was obviously a little uncomfortable when he sat next to Zhu Tingting. Zhu Tingting also noticed this and seemed to be very emotional. Obviously, she should have known about her before. She has a family genetic disease and has been hiding it from her boyfriend. In order to catch up with the BMW in front of him, Subai started racing on the highway. His speed did not exceed the highway limit, but he basically overtook cars when he encountered them, which was very efficient. About a quarter of an hour later, the BMW appeared in everyone's sight again. The couple in the BMW was also interesting. When the Audi behind them disappeared, they didn't even stop to wait or make a phone call to ask, but they just stayed there and flew around alone. They were really caring. After a few more hours, the car drove into Abba. It was basically a high and narrow mountain road. The mountain road was so narrow that it could only allow two cars to drive in the opposite direction. There were many curves and sharp corners, but this road the drivers drove very fast, basically ignoring the speed limit, and would just step on the brakes where there were cameras. After passing by, the speed immediately increased again. One side of the road is a mountain, and the other side is a cliff or a river. There is a barbed wire fence blocking the road from the mountain to the road to prevent the debris from falling from the mountain and hitting the road, causing danger. However, in some places, you can still see stones falling on the road. Obviously, this protective measure is not 100% insurance, but judging from Subai's memory, it is much better than before. After the Wenchuan earthquake, the country did make great efforts to reorganize and rebuild this transportation line. After a thorough inspection, tunnels were opened in many places that originally needed to go around the mountains, so there are often tunnels several kilometers long. These strange and exciting traffic routes made Sunuan and others in the car finally recover from Zhu Tingting's incident, and they began to continue chatting. Even Zhu Tingting herself seemed to have thought about it, and did not care about Lu Gang's treatment of her. His indifferent attitude, at worst, they would break up after returning. I should enjoy this trip first. At about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the BMW in front stopped in a small town and turned into the entrance of a hotel. It was probably about to stop for dinner. Sudbai also parked his car next to the BMW. Everyone got out of the car together. This was the first time that the owner of the BMW and Lanlan's girlfriend appeared in front of Sudbai. He was a tall and thin man. He didn't have anything special about his appearance, but he gave people a very pretentious feeling. With obvious scrutiny, especially when his eyes fell on Sudbai, there was a touch of disdain. Entering a Chiang restaurant, Lanlan's boyfriend ordered food, and everyone sat down around a round table. The food was quite unique, but Sudbai didn't like the taste very much, so he ate a little bit. The rest of them enjoyed their food very much, and took pictures with their mobile phones first of every dish. Sudbai, who had finished eating first, got off the table early, stood next to his car, took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a puff. At this time, a van drove up and stopped in front of Sudbai. The driver was unexpectedly "It's that monk. Amitabha, donor, we meet again." The monk parked the car and got out of the car. He was a little surprised to see Sudbai standing here, but it was nothing. There was only this road that ran through the entire Abba, so it was not surprising that everyone suddenly met in the middle. Thing. The monk went to the restaurant and asked for some hot water, and then bought some sachets. Then he returned to the van, filled the sachets with hot water and started eating. Sudbai walked to the van with a cigarette in his mouth. Seeing that the monk was eating seriously, he did not strike up a conversation, but walked to the back of the van. It seemed that the monk was driving the van alone, and there was no one else in the van. But the window film on the back of the van is a bit special, and you can't see the inside at all from the outside. Sudbai put his hand on the car window. This was an unintentional move. But when Sudbai moved his hand away, he suddenly found that his palm was still on it, but it was not outside, but inside. "There's someone inside." Sudbai immediately put his face close to the car window, almost pressing it. After a while, there was also a face imitating Sudbai and sticking it to the car window. It was the face of a baby, with all the pupils white. His face was green, but there was a playful smile on his lips. He obviously thought that interacting with Sudbai was a lot of fun. Sudbai immediately took a step back and turned his head, only to see the monk standing next to him. The monk walked without making any movement. "Donor, you'd better care about the things around you first. You don't need to care about the poor monk's affairs." "Oh, why?" Sudbai asked. "What you see with your eyes may not be true." "I want to see inside, is that okay?" Sudbai asked. However, the monk's reaction was very straightforward and he nodded directly, "Since the donor wants to see it, then let's see it." After saying that, the monk took the initiative to open the car door. The next moment, the scene inside the van appeared in front of Sudbai. There were 3 corpses inside, 2 adults, a man and a woman, and a child, who was the child who interacted with Sudbai before. The 3 corpses were all highly decomposed, but there was no smell of corpse odor. Amitabha, they are people who died outside and have turned into ghosts. Therefore, they must be sent to the sky burial platform to receive sky burial. Their bodies are eaten by eagles, so that their evil thoughts can be dissipated and reincarnated. This is what the poor monk did. I hope the donor will forgive me." The monk said it very compassionately, as if he was for the people of the world. But Sudbai directly reached in with one hand, turned the little boy's body around, pointed at the grooved wound on the back of the little boy's head and said, "Master, This wound should be a fatal injury caused by the string of Buddhist beads on your hand, right? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 79. The monk stopped talking and just stared at Subai with a smile on his face, as if he didn't hear what Subai said at all. Don't mind it, I just have a sharp eye. Subai shrugged, indicating that it was not his problem, but that the wounds on the corpse were too obvious, and the string of beads on your hand, monk, was really attractive, and maybe it was because of Subai. Bai's strength has been improved, which has obviously changed Subai's attitude towards some things. It is a bit exaggerated to say that people with high skills are bold, but it is like a policeman's attitude towards pickpockets or robberies. In short, his attitude will be better than that of ordinary people. A more calm feeling. The poor monk is leaving. The monk didn't seem to intend to continue to entangle with Subai here. He felt that there was no point in continuing to entangle. Moreover, the monk paid more attention to Subai from the beginning. Subai could also feel this. Obviously, the monk couldn't understand Subai's depth. Then I think we're going to call the police. Subai picked up the phone and shook it at the monk. Amitabha. The monk clasped his hands and recited the Buddha's name, then got into the van, which quickly started to move. Subai yawned, but did not actually call the police. Although the child was killed by the monk's beads, the three corpses obviously had a kind of heart-stopping fluctuation. Obviously, the monk was not completely injured. Lies. Moreover, if these three corpses are not handled properly and are really lost in this remote mountainous area with extremely underdeveloped transportation, then the harm caused and the difficulty of cleaning up the situation can be imagined. Of course, the most important reason is that Subai is here to relax, not to find trouble. He can walk around peacefully, relax and wait for the next story world to arrive. This is Subai's current plan. The monk drove the car and left here directly. In fact, if the monk continued to drive forward, as long as Subai drove faster, it would only be a matter of time to catch up with him. There are no side roads or auxiliary roads here. It is completely just a road. After all, it is already a huge project for the country to build a thoroughfare here. Besides, building a transportation network extending in all directions here does not make much sense. Back in the restaurant, Subai saw that Lan Lan was no longer there, probably going to the bathroom, but Lan Ian's boyfriend was very close to Sunuan, and even had a hand quietly on Sunuan's leg. Fumbling around, Sunuan continued to eat as if nothing was wrong, but her blushing cheeks showed that she felt something was happening. It's a really good plot. Subai suddenly felt that it was really interesting and exciting to travel with this group of people. This is why he uncharacteristically agreed to Sunuan's invitation to participate in a self-driving tour together. He spent too much time alone. I really feel that I need some life additives. If I go out for a walk with a group of people, at least I won't seem too lonely. Even Subai himself admitted that although when he was driving, he felt that the college students in his car were quite naive and superficial. But listening to their croaking along the way is also a kind of life. In the Audi car, Jixiang was still lying there sleeping. Subai opened the car door and reached out to touch Jixiang's hair. It was warm and soft under the sun. Jixiang opened his eyes, glanced at Subai, and then turned his head to continue sleeping. Past. At this time, those who had eaten had also finished and were ready to continue on their way. From here to Josegu, it was about 300 kilometers away. According to the road conditions, it would be good to reach Josegu at 6 or 7 o'clock tonight. Lan Lan and her boyfriend were riding in a car again. The man's name was Li Yu. This was the name Subai heard when Sunuan chatted after getting in the car. Lu Gang, Sun Lin, and others might be sitting in the back seat. Before Zhu Tingting felt it, Subai had heard that Sunuan was ready to fight for love and snatch her boyfriend from her so-called best friend. Poor Sun Lin had been courteous to Sunuan all the way, but she the target was touched by others when they were just eating. Back on the road, Subai lit a cigarette. At this time, the scenery on both sides of the road was getting better and better. The mountains were majestic and majestic. Driving on this road, regardless of the road conditions, was quite comfortable. Yes, Subai suddenly remembered the Ruurgai grassland. He had been there before, but that was when he was very young. The lush grassland, the endless herds of cattle and sheep, and there was a photo of himself and his mother at home. His mother put her photo taken by his father on the back of a yak. Subai didn't ask them if they had any plans to go to Ruurgai grassland. Anyway, he would send them to Josegu first. If they didn't want to go, Subai could just drive there by himself. If that didn't work, he would buy them a plane ticket and let them fly back to CD. In the afternoon, the temperature dropped significantly, but the atmosphere in the car became more and more lively, because the sky became bluer and bluer, truly cloudless, and the surrounding mountains were no longer bare. Becomes lush and green, it is like being in a landscape painting. Yes, the real harsh mountains and rivers have passed. If we drive forward for another hour, we can almost reach Josegu. At this time, Sunuan suddenly pointed to a place on the roadside and shouted, "Look, there are a lot of colorful flags hanging there." Sun Lin immediately became energetic and explained, "That is the place where sky burials are held. The local custom is to dispose of the corpse and leave it there for the eagles to eat." Sounds pretty beautiful. Sunuan was in a good mood at this time, so she didn't feel terrible hearing such things. "Why do I feel like my scalp is numb?" Lu Gang said at this time. "Yes, I feel terrible too," Zhu Tingting agreed. "You are too superficial. Think about it. After you die, you will not be buried in the soil or cremated into ashes. Instead, you will be eaten by these free spirits in the sky and take you to freedom in the sky. Flying freely, this is such a beautiful and pure thing." Sunuan has fallen into the narcissism of a young literary girl. Subai stretched out his hand outside the car window and shook out the cigarette ashes. "Sky burial costs money. Basically, it will cost you a few tens of thousands to feed the eagles. Calculate the income of the local Tibetans and Mongolians. In order to enjoy it once, the treatment of being able to feed the eagles after death is estimated to take half a lifetime of hard work." "Ah, it's so expensive," Lu Gang said in surprise. "Forget it, it's so expensive just to be eaten by an eagle," Zhu Tingting also said. Seeing that Subai had once again broken her fresh feeling, Sunuan pouted a little dissatisfied, but she was too embarrassed to say anything. The reason why she was deeply impressed by Subai was because she and Subai both had the same surname. Later I heard some classmates say that Subai's family conditions were very good, so I paid close attention to it. However, when I saw Subai actually renting a car, I felt that Subai was trying to make a fool of himself, and he was still like Liu. The second generation of Urbajing is more attractive to him. The BMW in front suddenly pulled over and stopped. Lan Lan and Liu got out, probably preparing to take pictures. Subai also had to stop the car. Sunuan got out of the car immediately, and Sun Lin naturally followed. "Lu Gang, let's take pictures too." "Okay," Zhu Tingting asked her boyfriend. Lu Gang's attitude towards Zhu Tingting has become a little cooler now, but he seems to have not decided whether to break up after returning. After all, there are still some things about Zhu Tingting that make him nostalgic, so he nodded at this time. Let's go down and take pictures." "I'll take pictures for you." Zhu Tingting nodded with satisfaction. Problems between young lovers really come and go quickly. Everyone else got out of the car, but Subai was still sitting in the car. Jixiang also became energetic at this time, sitting on Subai's lap and looking at the sky burial platform outside. Seeing that those people actually walked over to take pictures, Subai had no choice but to get out of the car with Jixiang in his arms, put Jixiang on the hood and shouted, "Hey, just stand here and take pictures. Photography and filming are not allowed over there, and it is not allowed to be a scenic spot. It is protected by law." "It's okay, just give me some money," Liu said calmly, and the others nodded. In their opinion, Tibetans are very poor, and they can easily spend it with some money. Subai was too lazy to care. In fact, there are rich people wherever there are hanging threads. These Tibetans near the highway are really not that poor. As for those who are willing to go to sky burial, they must be from well-off families. Very. However, before Liu and the others had time to leave, and while they were standing by the car and preparing to pack their things, a dozen Tibetans walked over from the other end of the road and were divided into two groups. One group walked towards the BMW, and the other group walked towards the BMW. Walked to Sudbai's Audi car. The person in front threw a torn rag on the hood of the BMW, and then said in Mandarin with a strong local accent, "I just cleaned your car for 300 yuan. Liu and the others were stunned. Sunuan, Lan Lan, and the others looked at these people dressed in Tibetan clothing with fear. Someone also came over to Sudbai's side. He was a Tibetan man with dark skin and plateau red. He also threw the rag towards the hood. Then, the rag fell on Ji Xiang, who was looking at the scenery of the celestial burial platform in front of him, completely covering the black cat. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 80. A dozen Tibetans came over, obviously intending to rob them by force. It was normal for these college students to be afraid and nervous. Subai didn't think it was anything, but when one of the Tibetans threw down the rag and sat upright, when the auspicious side of the celestial burial platform from the hood of the car was blocked, Subai was immediately stunned. This. Subai reached out cautiously, trying to wipe the rag off Jixiang's body. However, at this moment, Jixiang suddenly let out a low meow. Meow. The cat's meow was very low, with a little bit of hoarseness, but not much of a fireworks smell, but it made everyone present shiver from the bottom of their hearts, including Subai. Everyone seemed to be in a trance for a moment, but quickly regained consciousness, and no one knew what happened. Those Tibetans were just stunned for a moment, and then started pointing at Liu and Subai, asking for labor fees. After all, they cleaned your car and wanted wages. In fact, this kind of thing happened all over the country before, but in recent years the country has developed better and the transportation has become more and more developed. In some ordinary cities, there are cameras everywhere. With the huge network of surveillance systems and extremely efficient administrative crackdowns, nowadays, this low-level robbery method of blocking the road and shouting "I drove this road and planted this tree" is now rare. However, this is an extremely remote area after all. Not to mention sparsely populated, there is only one serious road. In addition, these Tibetans also know how to cover up a little. They are not here to rob, but to get money for cleaning the car. With this layer of skin to cover up, and their special ethnic identity, some local government departments also choose to turn a blind eye. After all, these current policies are very sensitive. The torn rag was taken away by Subai. Ji Xiang continued to maintain his original posture and looked at the celestial burial platform in the distance. But Subai was sure that when he just lifted the rag, he saw a red light in Ji Xiang's eyes. In a flash, when Subai saw Jixiang for the first time, he saw a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood from Jixiang's pupils. Moreover, before, Jixiang could follow Lizzie and become Lizzie's pet. How could he be so good with him? Character of Subai still remembered the feeling before, almost stimulating his bloodline to burst out, but he had to forcefully suppress it, otherwise Subai would have revealed his vampire or zombie state in front of everyone just now. Liu took out his wallet, pulled out 3 $100 bills and handed them over. His face was very calm. Spending money to eliminate disasters was nothing to him, and at this time and in this situation, he was soft on these Tibetans. It's not a shameful thing. It's almost as if this place is called a wilderness. There aren't many passing vehicles, and naturally there aren't many pedestrians. Even if there are pedestrians, they are mostly local Tibetans. To put it bluntly, it sounds good, this is a good place for murder and arson. When a modern person leaves the city and the surveillance camera area and suddenly comes to an inaccessible place, this sense of insecurity will be particularly strong. Fortunately, these Tibetans are not really guilty of killing people and setting fires. After receiving the money, they can talk easily and won't be embarrassment. After all, they plan to continue doing it for a long time to make extra money. If the matter really gets too big, the higher UPS will be forced to take action. They didn't end up well either. When one of them walked up to Subai and asked for money, Subai opened his wallet and gave him not 300, but 500. The man was also stunned for a moment. He had encountered people bargaining before doing this kind of thing, and they didn't mind subtracting 500 yuan. After all, it was a no-cost transaction. How much money was not earned, but this was the first time he saw it. Take the initiative to add money. Over there, Li Yu and others also saw this scene, and they all showed confusion and disdain in their eyes. Obviously, they thought Subai was frightened. In fact, only Subai knew what he was doing. Giving him a few $100s more was nothing to Subai, and it wouldn't be enough money for a group of them to go to a sky burial. After collecting the money and saying hello, the dozen or so Tibetans left in a polite manner without any entanglement. Li Yu and others were no longer interested in taking pictures, and were worried that after this group of people left, they would notify others to come and slaughter the fat sheep. Subai also returned to the car, and Jixiang was also carried in by Subai and placed on his lap. After Sunuan sat in, she rolled her eyes at Subai and said, "Subai, there's no need for us to be so cowardly. Besides, Li Yu has already given me $300. If you don't give them this car, they won't say anything." Subai just smiled and was too lazy to explain. The BMW in front started to move, so Subai started the car and followed it. There was still some distance to travel, so he had to arrive in Juzai early so he could check into a hotel and rest early. After driving for such a long time, Subai was indeed a little tired. There is a van parked at the sky burial platform. It has to be said that it is a very strange thing for a car with a mainland license plate to drive here. In 2005, the People's Government of the Tibet Autonomous Region issued a notice on the interim regulations on the management of sky burials. The area where sky burials are held is prohibited from being set up as a scenic spot, and photography and other activities are prohibited. Therefore, even if many tourists visiting Tibetan areas are curious about this, it is difficult to get a glimpse of the true secret. An obviously elderly lama and a man in black monk's robes were sitting on the floor, with 2 cups of butter tea in front of them. It was obvious that the monk in black robes was not very fond of butter tea, but the old lama was enjoying drinking it alone. "Kilo, you still don't like butter tea?" the old lama said with a smile, looking very kind. "Ever since I first came here and saw how to cook butter tea, I didn't like it anymore. It always tasted like cow dung when I drank it," Monk Kilo said very directly. "Haha, that's because your worldly mind is still there, otherwise, there's nothing to look at," the old lama said. "You look away just to look away, and you go against your true intentions just to look away. If you don't like it, you actually don't like it. If you insist on doing it deliberately, you will get caught up in it," Chi Lu replied. "Okay, I can't beat you. Well, it's not easy for you to come here. Let me take a look at what you got." The old lama stood up, and a young lama beside him brought a golden drum. The old lama smiled and waved his hand. "There is no need to put up these things. Since Brother Chi was able to bring that thing here, he obviously did what he should of precaution." At the old lama's signal, a young and strong lama went to open the door of the van, and then stepped out respectfully without even looking inside. At this time, the bodies of the 3 members of the family were sitting in the van, showing a very strange sitting posture. The old lama reached out and touched the male's body, frowned, then touched the boy's body, took a focused look at the wound on the back of the boy's head, and sighed. "Junior brother, thank you for your hard work, and you also committed murder. My parents have entered the ghost realm, and the children are also infected. I can only kill them. There is no way to save them. It is better to take precautions early so that they can harm less people. Bhutan knows it well and will not blame me." The old lama nodded, looked at the three corpses again, then turned around and looked at the sky burial platform behind him. Above him, a dozen eagles were circling, obviously waiting for the big meal. The eagles near the sky burial platform often eat human flesh and have developed a ferocious nature. They will even attack living people in the nearby area. The old lama was a little embarrassed and said, "Brother Chi lawyer, I won't help you if you are not a senior brother, but these three corpses are too evil. Senior brother, I can't digest the celestial burial platform here and I dare not digest it. If you don't believe me, try it. Senior brother, I can guarantee that even if we place the corpses of this family of three on the sky burial platform and perform all the rituals, the eagles will not dare to come down and take a bite. But, senior brother, this family of three came back from traveling to Tibetan areas and were infected with ghost energy. They have entered the ghost realm. This smell and this technique are obviously created by Tantric Buddhism. Naturally, you have to go there in person to cause the cause you have planted here. It bore its fruit. There are so many Tantric sects, it doesn't necessarily require me, senior brother." As he spoke, the old lama's expression suddenly changed, and he immediately shouted angrily, "You are so brave. Where did the evil spirit come from? You dare to kill people wantonly in my execution ground." Chi Lu turned around and headed towards the north, where there was obviously a strong smell of blood rising into the sky. The group of people quickly left the celestial burial platform and went directly to the location filled with the smell of blood. Soon, dozens of lamas came to a mountain cairn. The mountain col was not very steep and was only 2 kilometers away from the road. However, here, there were more than a dozen corpses of Tibetans lying on the ground. Their death conditions were extremely miserable. Each of them seemed to have been scratched countless times by sharp claws. The skin was torn and the flesh was bloody. The old lama clenched one fist, slapped his staff on the ground, and whispered a secret incantation. After reciting the obscure incantation, a twisted and frightened soul appeared in front of the old lama. Chi Lu clasped his hands together and recited the Buddha's name, because he knew that the souls forcibly captured in this way would never be reincarnated and would not be able to enter reincarnation. "Tell me, who harmed you?" the old lama asked. But this soul had a dazed emotion. Apparently, he himself didn't know why he died suddenly. "You don't even know how a useless thing died," the old lama was obviously angry. He stretched out his palm and put it directly on the head of the soul. Then, the scene that just happened appeared in the old lama's mind. Middle. There is an expert among those mainland tourists. Such cruel hearts, even though they were at fault, why did they die? Since you are a member of Xiandao, why should you be like ordinary people? At this time, a picture condensed in the old lama's eyes. In the picture was Subai's expression when he gave him 500 yuan, without any fear or panic, but with a touch of pity. "It's him, it must be him, it must be him," the old lama roared. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 81. In fact, it took more than an hour to drive to Josegu, but the BMW in front still stopped in Songpan County. It was probably to have dinner and stay here for a night. Subai didn't say anything about this, although I really want to drive directly to Josai to find a better hotel to rest, but there are so many people in my car, so I can't just leave them on the roadside and walk alone. Moreover, The most important thing is that not long after the previous incident happened, Subai, who was driving, felt a sudden haze rising in his heart. He stopped the car and everyone else got off the car and went to the restaurant to prepare for dinner. Subai also I took out my phone while sitting in the car, and there was indeed a message on WeChat, which was a private preview message from Terror 66. The difficulty of the story world will be increased by 30% next time. Subai was a little confused when he saw this message. How come this message was suddenly sent to him, and the difficulty increased by 30%? Generally speaking, most people in the story world have a narrow escape from death. If the difficulty increases just a little bit, the hope of that life may be gone, let alone 30%. Where does the basis for this difficulty increase come from? Subai thought for a while and sent a screenshot of the message to Fatty. Although the relationship between him and Fatty was a bit awkward now, he could only ask him now. The fat man responded quickly and asked directly, "Did you kill someone in reality? And it wasn't the kind of killing that had a causal relationship? Even if they didn't offend you, nor did they offend your relatives or friends, you killed them directly? Or did they kill too many?" Subai thought for a while and replied no. But then, Subai saw Ji Xiang sitting on his lap, and replied, "Yes, but I didn't kill him, it was a pet beside me." "Oh, that makes sense. Since it is your pet, the cause and effect of the people it kills must be on your head. You should be careful in the future. Killing some ordinary people is not a big problem, as long as it doesn't matter if the number of people is not very large or they are not special people. In reality, the punishment for killing the audience for no reason will be even greater." The fat man's last words were a nod to Subai. Subai agreed, replied "I know" and put the phone back in his pocket. At this time, Subai discovered that Jixiang actually raised his head, and his previous chat history on his mobile phone was also seen by Jixiang. Jixiang rubbed his head on Subai's arm aggrievedly. Although the cat was usually very cold, after knowing that he had caused trouble to Subai, he was also a little embarrassed. After all, he felt good about killing him, but Subai he might be implicated and die in the next story world. Subai was open-minded and stretched out his hand to rub Ji Xiang's head. "It's okay. The person killed wasn't a good person anyway, so it's not too bad." Holding Jixiang in his arms, Subai got out of the car and entered the hotel. A group of people were already sitting together. Subai found an empty seat and sat down. During the period, everyone was chatting and joking. The atmosphere was pretty good. Subai wasn't. He was very responsive, and he was very silent along the way, so the others also tacitly agreed not to chat with Subai, and Subai was happy to be quiet. However, this yak meat wild mushroom pot tastes really good, and Subai is very satisfied with this meal. Li Yu indeed fulfilled his previous promise. After having a good meal and paying the bill, he said that the hotel was booked and everyone could go and rest. After walking out of the hotel and eating the hot pot, Subai felt a little hot. He looked around and found that there were very few supermarkets around. Most of them were restaurants. It was probably because the local population was relatively small, and the county's urban area was only it is the size of a town in other parts of the East, so the profit of opening a supermarket is far lower than that of opening a restaurant. Anyway, there are indeed a lot of restaurants. "Subai, aren't you going to the hotel?" Zhu Tingting asked, holding Lu Gang's hand and walking past Subai. "I'm going to buy a pack of cigarettes first, you go ahead." Subai waved his hand. Subai walked across the road. His car had been parked in a fenced area far away. Originally, Li Yu wanted to park on the road in front of the hotel, but a hotel owner nearby who was soliciting business was introducing business. Even after being rejected, he was not angry. He smiled and reminded them not to park on the roadside because it was unsafe at night, so Li Yu and Subai had no choice but to call out the people who were looking for the hotel they had booked and ask them to arrange parking spots. In the supermarket, Subai bought a pair of cigarettes, some drinks, and peanuts, and walked out with the bag. Songpan is a county town surrounded by mountains. Standing in the county town, you can look around at mountains. Just because you are on a plateau, for tourists, even if you don't have serious altitude sickness, your breathing will feel a bit stuffy and your heart will feel a little hot. The depressing feeling still makes it difficult to relax and enjoy such beautiful scenery. Of course, the scenery over Josegu Valley is another matter. The scenery there can indeed make people ignore the altitude at which they are at this time. "Uncle, do you want a pendant?" A little girl wearing Tibetan clothes came to Subai. She was holding many pendants and jewelry and selling them to Subai. "How much does one cost?" Subai asked. 30 apiece, very beautiful, said the little girl. In fact, it's hard to say how much collection value this kind of jewelry sold in scenic spots has, because most souvenir shops or mobile souvenirs here are wholesale from CDs, and some are even wholesale from Uwu, Zhejiang. Subai looked at the little girl and asked, "Are you Han or Tibetan?" The little girl stuck out her tongue playfully and said truthfully, "Han." Subai also smiled, reached out and touched the little girl's head, then took out 100 yuan from his wallet. "Come on 3, there's no need to look for it." The little girl gave Subai 4 pendants. "I'll give you 4, you don't have to look for them, haha." After saying that, the little girl turned around and ran away, looking very happy. Subai stuffed the 4 pendants into his pocket, then looked at Ji Xiang who was lying on his shoulder. After thinking about it, he took out one of the pendants and hung it around Ji Xiang's neck. Ji Xiang was stunned. The cold cat seemed to have never thought that Subai would hang such a 30 yuan street stall pendant bought on the street around his neck. Quite good looking. After Subai finished hanging it, he touched Ji Xiang's hair. Fortunately, although the cat had some dissatisfaction in its eyes, it did not get angry because of it and did not take off the pendant. It just continued to lie on Subai's shoulder. Back at the hotel, Subai took his ID card to register, and the front desk clerk gave Subai his room card. Liu was a bit stylish, at least he wasn't a small-minded person. Food and accommodation were included. After doing it, Subai was happy to eat, drink and sleep along. But this hotel is really not very good. Of course, there are no good hotels in Songpan where you want to spend money to stay. It is only more than an hour's drive from Josegu and Huanglong scenic area. There are star hotels there, so this is just one. Naturally, there are no high-end hotels invested and built in the place where we are temporarily staying. However, the name of the hotel is quite stylish. It is called Songpan Cultural Hotel. Subai just looked at it when he got on the elevator. Apart from a little Tibetan-style oil painting, there was nothing special. There was also a girl in the elevator, wearing a light blue down jacket. Obviously a tourist. Coming for a trip, the girl took the initiative to strike up a conversation with Subai. Yes, Subai nodded. "Do you live alone?" The elevator door opened. Subai swiped the door card and entered his room. A damp smell hit his face. "Well, let's take it as it comes." Subai put Jixiang on the bed and prepared to take a shower first. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Subai opened the door with his upper body naked. The girl he met in the elevator before stood at Subai's door. "Hello, I am a college student who is traveling on a budget. In order to collect travel expenses, how about I accompany you and give you 800 for one trip?" Seeing that Subai didn't answer, the girl took out her student ID card. She was really a college student from a mainland province, and judging from her conversation and dress, she didn't look like a local person who specializes in the flesh business. "This is my student ID card. I'm a genuine female college student. 800 yuan a time is really not expensive. Forget it, I'll give you a discount. You're so handsome. How about 500 yuan a time?" "Really?" "No, 600 for the night." Subai took out his wallet. He planned to give the girl 600 yuan to go back to her room to sleep. It wasn't that Subai was a germaphobe and pretended to be aloof, or that she looked down on girls selling their bodies for a poor trip, but Mr. Bai didn't either. Even if there is a shortage of women, there is no need to choose a general just to vent in a place like this. You can do it casually in other matters. Subai still has a very high vision in this kind of matter. However, the girl mistakenly thought that Subai had agreed to pay, and hurriedly waved her hand and said, "You can pay after you finish. You want to prepare to take a bath. Take a bath first, and I will go to my room to get a condom." As soon as Subai took out the money, the girl turned around and left. Ah! With a smile, Subai put the money on the shoe cabinet, then took off his clothes and went to the bathroom to take a shower. About 5 minutes later, the knock on the door came again. Subai walked out of the bathroom naked and opened the door a small gap. Then he threw out the 600 yuan that had been placed on the shoe cabinet. "I'm tired today, I don't need you to accompany me anymore." After saying that, Subai closed the door again and continued to walk back to the bathroom to take a shower. Monk Kilo, who was standing at the door, looked at the $600 bills falling in front of him with a confused look on his face. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 82. Monk Kilo took a deep breath. Fortunately, his state of mind was very high. However, anyone with good intentions who sneaked over to report the news and planned to help others ended up inexplicably encountering 6 RMB falling on the ground. There would probably be a feeling in his heart. An urge to hit someone. Dong dong dong. The monk gently knocked on the door again. Subai ignored her and continued to take a shower. She was still thinking that this girl was persistent and loyal enough to insist on sleeping with him even after giving her money. This was considered the conscience of the industry, even though she sold her life for a poor trip. Subai couldn't accept this kind of physical behavior, but at least he still had a kind of persistence in dealing with others. God is pitiful. If the Kilo monk standing outside the door knew what Subai was thinking right now, he might be so angry that he would take out the magic pestle and smash Subai's brains out. Finally, Subai was a little annoyed by the knock on the door. He wiped his body and walked out. He reached out and opened the door. When Subai saw the monk standing outside the door and the RMB scattered on the ground, he suddenly felt a rush. Toothache. Why is it him? Master, come in. Monk Kilo was indeed very well educated, and he knew that what happened before was probably due to a misunderstanding. He was not willing to get too involved in Subai's personal affairs, so he walked in simply. Subai picked up the money on the ground, threw it on the shoe cabinet, then closed the door, got dressed first, and then walked to the bed. Monk Kilo stood at the window, which was half open, and he stared out through the gap in the window. "Monk, what's wrong? Did you kill some Tibetans today?" Upon hearing this, Subai's eyes flickered slightly and he said calmly, "What's wrong? There is a great llama guarding each sky burial platform. You are very unlucky. The sky burial platform near where you killed someone is one of the most prestigious great lamas in Sichuan. He is looking for you now, and he has also arrived. Songpan, it's just that I found you faster than him." Subai didn't care much about this, and didn't look too panicked. Although he was on someone else's territory now, this was the real world after all, not the story world. In the story world, sometimes he had to suffer a lot for the so-called plot development. Big constraints, but in the real world, if you can't afford to offend, you can always hide. Then what? Subai asked, since this monk specially came to inform him, he obviously had his own purpose. Subai didn't believe that this guy was really compassionate, so he came to inform him purely because he didn't want to die. Subai still remembered how the little boy died very clearly, and he was indirectly responsible for the lives of more than a dozen Tibetans. No matter how compassionate this monk was, he should not be sitting on his side. The poor monk just wants to ask you something. Have you heard of the terrorist broadcast? When asking this question, Monk Kilo kept staring at Sudbai's eyes. Seeing that Sudbai was silent and did not answer, Monk Kilo smiled, took out his mobile phone, then clicked on the screen, and then put a public account. The interface was placed in front of Sudbai. Sudbai looked at it and nodded. Originally, Sudbai actually thought that the monk was really a virtuous monk. But now he was sure that the other party's ability may come largely from the terrorist broadcast. Of course, if it was in, it would be even scarier if there were Daosing in reality and they struggled to survive in the story world of horror broadcasts, because these people have a much higher starting point than other listeners. It turns out to be a fellow villager. Sudbai made a joke. At this time, the water on the electric kettle was boiling. Sudbai poured 2 glasses of water, handed one to the monk, and took the other in his hand. Do you know the actual mission? Monk Kilo drank the water in the cup in one gulp. Obviously, he was thirsty, but this was water that had just been boiled. He actually finished it without blinking. Even if it was among the, there is an element of showing one's own strength, but it must be said that this monk is indeed a bit unpredictable. Realistic tasks, Sudbai remembered Fatty mentioning it, which meant that horror broadcasts would sometimes issue some tasks to some listeners in the real world, such as solving some supernatural phenomena or dealing with things that are relatively harmful to society. For horror radio, the real world is its backyard, and it must ensure the stability and harmony of its backyard, at least not causing any bad things that cannot be dealt with. The poor monk is doing a real task, but now he needs a helper. If you are willing to help the poor monk can send you an invitation. It is equivalent to forming a team to do the task. The rewards will be distributed according to the contribution to completing the task. You will not suffer any loss of. However, the story point is not very attractive to me, and I really want to travel safely this time, and I don't want to worry about other things. The story point is indeed not very attractive to Sudbai, but it is not completely unattractive. Sudbai also checked it before. He was wondering if he could redeem some weapons from the WeChat store, and then he took a fancy to 2 items. One was basic hellfire, and the other was one is elementary death scythe. Although the word elementary is added in front, its power cannot be underestimated. You can see it just by looking at the exchange cost of 1000 story points for each piece. 1000 story points is probably an amount that cannot be taken out directly for listeners with a mission completion level of 5. After all, they have spent most of them step by step just to exchange and strengthen their bloodline and physique step by step. The story points are so high that only an alien like Sudbai, whose bloodline physique cannot be strengthened through WeChat stores, can save more than 800 story points and hasn't used them up to now. Realistic mission story point rewards are actually not many, or even almost non-existent, Monk Kilo said. What nonsense, Sudbai looked at Monk Kilo and said with a smile, Monk, you are not doing volunteer work, right? Completing real-life tasks is a way to relieve the horror broadcasters. You can take this opportunity to increase your favorability. Then, in the next story, it will become easier and you may even get some preferential treatment. Monk Kilo stretched out his hand. Pulling the curtains down, there were 2 llamas wandering around outside. They turned around and continued to say to Sudbai, you killed a dozen Tibetans. You should be notified of the karmic punishment. Sudbai blew on his bangs and nodded. You only need to start this mission of the poor monk. It does not require you to be in too much danger, and it will not affect your travel. The poor monk also needs to go to Wukai Pond in Josegu to get something first, and then go to Swibayading in Huanglong. If nothing else, it is actually consistent with your travel route, and the poor monk is not in a hurry. After all, the poor monk has just spent time in a story world, so he should be able to stay in reality for a longer time. Sudbai thought about it and found that the story points were indeed not that attractive to him, but what the monk said about the opportunity to increase his favorability and reduce the difficulty of the next story world did make Subai a little tempted, and he did not hesitate at the moment. Yes, he said directly. How do I accept the invitation to form a team? The monk's fingers clicked on the phone a few times, and then a WeChat message came from Subai's phone. It was a preview message sent by the public account Horror66. Chi-Lu requests to team up with you to complete real-life tasks. Subai replied agree. Then, the content of the actual mission appeared in Subai's mind. It was a mission that didn't seem to be very difficult. First, he had to go to an inland city to suppress a family that had been infected with ghost energy and had entered the ghost realm. Then bring them to Zishuan to deal with them. The monk has already done half of this task himself. The ones infected with ghost energy are the 3 members of the family in the car, Subai asked. Monk Kilo nodded, exactly. It's just that the poor monk wanted to take them to the sky burial platform and use the sky burial customs here to resolve their resentment and evil spirits. However, the eagles in the sky burial platform have also degenerated a lot over the years. Actually dare not eat their corpses, so there is no other way. The poor monk can only hope that the sacred urn on the top of the Swibeo can completely dissolve them. Why not send it directly to the crematorium? Subai asked. Their physical bodies are now a kind of restraint for them. While destroying their physical bodies, if they cannot destroy and dissolve their deep-seated existence, it is equivalent to throwing a bomb into the furnace. Go. In the past, those who accepted sky burials were all highly respected and devout believers. However, in recent years, the money worship culture has also eroded this place. Most of the people who can go to sky burials are rich people. This also makes those who could have used it as a way to resolve resentments and dissolve traces. The Kondor has also degenerated from devouring these people over the years. Okay, what do you want me to do? Subai lit a cigarette and turned on the TV in the room. The poor monk's car has a magic weapon that can block the breath and avoid ordinary tracking. You can accompany the poor monk to get it? If the Tibetan monk here finds you, it will be really troublesome. Hey, there's also a gift bag. It's a loan, not a gift. Although it's just a low-level magic weapon, it's also the poor monk's own. It's not a prop exchanged from a WeChat store. Chin, it's a loan, it's a loan. Subai didn't mind, he just got the things in his hands first. Taking out the key card, Subai and Monk Kilo left the room together. Subai was not worried about Monk Kilo cheating him. The team formation process was completed by Terror Broadcasting as the middleman, which also meant that both parties had to follow the big plot as if they were in the story world. Similarly, if Monk Kilo deliberately helps those llamas to trick him, then Monk Kilo himself will be punished by the terrorist broadcast. The two walked to the elevator in the corridor. When they passed a room, they heard the very clear gasps and excited screams of a girl coming from inside. She was obviously doing that kind of exercise. The quality of the local hotels in Songpan was indeed poor, and the sound insulation effect was poor. It was really speechless. Subai could even tell that the girl who screamed in excitement was the female college student who came to him for a poor trip before. No wonder it took so long to get a condom. It turned out that she had taken on a private job temporarily. She probably planned to wait for this family. After the customer has delivered the goods first, he should come to you, the customer you have already negotiated with. Do you know him? Monk Kilo suddenly asked at this time. Subai looked at the house number of the room. It should be Sun Lin's room, because Liu reserved 5 consecutive rooms. The business here is not very good, so there are only 5 residents on this floor, namely Subai's own, Liu and Lanlin's, Lu Gang and Zhu Tingting's, Sunuan's and Sun Lin's. Of course, Sunuan can't be grinding mirrors with that female college student. The rest are lovers living together. After analysis, it's just a matter of fact. Knowing that this should be Sun Lin's room, I thought that Sun Lin was chasing Sunuan but failed and couldn't bear the loneliness at night, So he hit it off with this female college student who was traveling on a budget and was short of money. Let's go. Subai and Kilo entered the elevator together. Kilo's van was parked in front of the hotel. The llama outside had already left. Apparently they thought the hotel would be fine with Kilo checking. The two came to the van. Chilu first took out a yellow cloth bag from the cab, and then took out a jade pendant of not very good quality and handed it to Subai. While Subai was still playing with it, Chilu suddenly seemed to have discovered something and suddenly opened the door of the van. Subai took advantage of the situation and looked over, and then his eyes immediately focused. The van was supposed to be sitting with the dead family of 3. At this time, there were also 3 people sitting there, 2 adults and 1 child. The 2 adults were also a man and a woman, but that man it was obviously not the dead husband, but someone very familiar to Subai. This person had been riding in Subai's car all day. It's Sun Lin. Subai's face suddenly became very strange. If Sun Lin got into the van inexplicably because of something, then the one who was doing something in Sun Lin's room. Which one?